At the absolute lowest levels of biology, the prime directive is incredibly simple. Organisms must strictly secure resources and survive. This survival instinct is hardwired into us. But when we drag it into a rational debate, it becomes a logical error, known as the appeal to self-interest fallacy. Prioritizing your own well-being is entirely rational when making daily, personal decisions. Choosing a job that pays more or a house in a safer neighborhood makes practical sense. The logic breaks down the moment we try to scale that personal metric up to evaluate broad public policies, institutional rules, or moral issues. Using your own financial or social gain as the measuring stick for a systemic policy is a distinct category error. What benefits you personally does not prove whether a policy is objectively good or bad. To understand why this fails, we have to look at formal logic's most uncompromising rule, the relevance criterion. The rule dictates that any reason you offer in an argument must bear directly on the objective truth or merit of the conclusion. If the premise doesn't count as evidence for the claim, it gets discarded. Using standard form, we see how valid premises stack to support a specific conclusion. A sound argument distributes its logic seamlessly. Evidence flows directly into the final claim. Insert a subjective, self-interested premise, and you create a mechanical failure. The logic immediately snaps. We are going to put 3 different arguments on the drafting board, spanning economics, social policy, and education, to locate exactly where this failure occurs. In each case, we will see that structural validity, rather than personal gain, remains the only reliable metric for evaluating a public argument. We begin by testing this against macroeconomic policy. Consider a scenario where a politician urges you to support an administration's new tax cut bill. Their primary argument is that, given your high income bracket, you will personally save a significant amount of money. If we map this argument in standard form, we start with the baseline factual premise. The administration's bill cuts income and capital gains taxes. Next, the arguer adds their sub-premise. You have a high income and potential capital gains, so you will financially benefit. Finally, they attempt to complete the logical chain with a conclusion. Therefore, you should support the bill. To execute the deduction, we have to isolate that second premise and put it under strict scrutiny. The fact that you might secure a personal financial windfall provides zero evidence regarding the objective merit of the public policy itself. The structure collapses. To determine if an economic policy is actually sound, the premises must address systemic variables, like the impact on the national debt, inflation rates, or overall macroeconomic health. Your personal bank account is not a systemic variable. Confusing a private financial benefit with sound public policy is a total collapse of structural logic. We can apply this exact same stress test to social policy. Imagine an argument directed at a woman named Rebecca. She is pressured to actively support her college's new affirmative action program simply because she is a woman. We map the first premise. The affirmative action program aims to hire more women.
Then comes the demographic sub-premise being used to compel her agreement. You are a woman. And the requested conclusion. Therefore, you should support the program. Once again, we isolate the demographic sub-premise to test its formal relevance. A person's demographic identity yields no empirical evidence regarding the effectiveness or societal merit of the proposed program. The logic fails to connect. A structurally valid argument for this program would require premises built on historical data, institutional equity metrics, or systemic impact. Individual identity is an irrelevant factor in determining the policy's objective value. Biological or demographic alignment cannot be substituted for a rigorous defense of social policy. Our final test occurs within the domain of institutional design. A Spanish professor is advised to vote against a proposal that would drop the university's foreign language requirement. The reason given is that dropping the requirement would lower her class enrollments and put her job at risk. The foundational premise is mapped. Dropping the requirement lowers foreign language enrollment. Next is the career preservation subpremise. Low enrollment threatens your job security and department size. And the intended conclusion. Therefore, you must vote to keep the requirement. Look closely at the substitution taking place here. The arguer has entirely replaced the educational merit of the curriculum with an appeal to pure career self-preservation. The conclusion is supposed to determine what is best for a student's education, but the premises only address the professor's job security. The conclusion remains completely unsupported. Relevant variables for this debate would involve evaluating student educational needs, global competitiveness, and overall curricular integrity. Optimizing for the self-preservation of the staff corrupts the decision-making matrix of the entire institution. Placing all three logical models side by side reveals the shared structural flaw across entirely different disciplines. A single irrelevant variable corrupts the economics, the social policy, and the educational curriculum equally. The arguer utilizes this specific premise to bypass a rigorous, objective debate, hacking directly into the listener's primal instinct for self-preservation. It is a form of intellectual hijacking. The tactic forces the debate out of objective reality and drags it down into the realm of subjective bias. Recognizing this structural bait-and-switch visually is the mandatory first step to neutralizing it in conversation. Confronting this fallacy in real time requires a deliberate tactical strategy. First, acknowledge the personal benefit openly. There is no need to become defensive or deny that lower taxes or job security would be advantageous to you. Second, execute a pivot that forces the conversation back to the relevance criterion. Explicitly ask the arguer to formulate an alternative argument that makes absolutely zero reference to your personal benefits. The ultimate goal of rational discourse is discovering objective truth. Reaching that truth requires us to ruthlessly strip our own self-interest from the equation.